Welcome in here on a Wednesday, 3304 Daily, February 2nd. Big news day today. Oh man, this is very, very exciting. The Washington football team has a new name. That is where we're going to lead off today's show. Dan Steinbach, Ryan Wilkes in our producer's chair. We're joined by Colby Talley and Brian Kearney. And then coming up later to end our show around 2:10, we've got a interview with Jake Lyman and Nick Brown, who will be on the call for tonight's Virginia Tech men's basketball game against Georgia Tech. All right, gentlemen. Let's get into it, and then later in the show, we've got Brian Flores talk, as well as some MLB updates. So, we got to start out, news of the day. The team in Washington has a new name. It's taken 2 seasons for them to come up with this name, and it is the Washington Commanders. Now, I don't think we need to necessarily get into... No, I think we do. I think this conversation has to start with the fact that this announcement was just terrible. Because if you were following this closely, or even loosely, if you weren't following this close at all, and you were just, somewhat dialed into news in the region, or you just happened upon sports radio one day, there's a good chance that you came across the fact that all of this information and Commanders was leaked about a month ago. I first remember my first, real, source being that it had been leaked that the NFL had started copywriting the name Commanders. And so that in and of itself is like, okay, that's going to be the name. They're going to drag this out. That was before the release date was even, or the announcement date was even announced for today. And then I want to say it was a couple weeks ago. The domain name for commanders.com was bought. So all of that mixed together. And then, of course, last night, panning down a drone on FedEx Field, looking inside the concourse, the name Commanders, all the art already being up in the stadium, and people getting an inside look at that. All that was last night. So the fact that the name is Commanders is not a shock. So now, with that out of the way, the question becomes, is it a good name? And you can text in your thoughts at 540-216-2231, or you can hit us up in the YouTube live chat. And here's where I am with it. Personally, I don't like it. Now, if you guys want to just throw Ryan and I's opinions out of the way because we're dirty Cowboys fans, go ahead. But just thinking about the name Commanders, I took some time last night to think to myself, okay, why do I think this name is bad? And I don't want to just come on today and say, oh, it's just a plain name. It's a basic name. Because in reality, it isn't. It's very unique. But was it too unique? And when I say unique, I mean, Commanders isn't a name that you associate with sports. And I looked this up, and I went to what was, it's called mascotdatabase.com. And they have a full, extensive list of the most common mascot names used in American sports. And these are from current pro teams, from defunct pro teams, from semi-professional leagues to high school, teams. They are very broad with their data here. So obviously you have like your most common names like your Eagles, your Panthers, your Lions. Those are all very common names. And then you have some of your least common names like Bills, 49ers. Those are all very exclusive to just those football teams. Commanders across the United States, according to this database, is only used 10 times. So it's a very rare name to be used for sports. Now, names like this can work. And I was getting into a conversation last night with a friend, and I mentioned these stats, and he said, okay, well, Kraken's not a name that's used. The Seattle Kraken just have started, and Kraken, that is the only name, that is the only team that uses the name Kraken. And I simply responded with, yeah, but it sounds cooler. That was all I went with. Seattle Kraken works better for me than Washington Commanders. Now, if you have a differing opinion, I mean, again, that's your opinion. But Commanders, I think the thing missing from it, and rather than just say it's too plain, I'm going to go with saying it just doesn't feel like it has any heart. And now look, all the names of the NFL teams right now, you can point to them and say, okay, it's tradition. They've been that way, mostly forever. And at this point, we just accept them because they've been around for this long. So maybe in time we will grow to love Commanders, or we will grow to at least respect Commanders, acknowledge its presence. But I don't know. Do I want to say it feels cheap? I don't know. I think the thing for me is I appreciate when in some way, if you're going to change the name of a franchise, you're going to add an expansion franchise, that in this modern era, it should reflect the city. And that's honestly why I really enjoyed Washington football team. I thought that it just being, hey, this is Washington's football team. Like, this is the football team in Washington. I thought that was good, and I don't think Commanders does that. Now, to me, at the end of the day, uh, I don't usually call teams by their nickname. I usually do just call them Washington. I do call them Philadelphia. I call them now. I believe there's like two teams. I always call like the Giants, and the Jets. The Jets, not New York, but I mean that's just me. So they'll still probably just be Washington, but overall, it still does feel rather underwhelming, and not just because of the leaks, but because of the decision that they made. I want to throw it around the horn, but just real quick, the popularity of this is I have not seen one person that is ecstatic about this name change, about the name that they have chosen, and even still, I know that there's one video going around social media right now of Chase Young saying that he gave this name an F grade when he was first introduced to it as a possibility. I went back and I watched this whole interview. He basically said no to every single name. The only one I think that was somewhat acceptable to him, he gave the name Red Wolves a C minus. Everything else was like D, E, F. So he was not a fan of any of the top 8 names that they came up with. And then when they told him, hey, you want to just keep Washington football team, he was like, yeah, all right, because I mean he's obviously not going to ditch or diss the name of the team he's currently on. So I want to throw it around the horn, and once again, the number is 540-216-2231. Get your quick thoughts on the name rollout. If you have thoughts on the jersey, if you have thoughts on what their name could have been, we're interested to hear from you. So do that, text the number or YouTube live chat. All right, let's go around the horn. Let's start with our co-host for the day, and he is Colby Talley.
I mean, on the face of it, I see what you're saying about it. On the face of it, Commanders isn't necessarily a bad name. I think it fits with the overall theme of Washington being the nation's capital. We have all these institutions like, the military, the government, and just being the nation by virtue of being the nation's capital. I think Commanders fits. It's not a bad name. I actually did hear an interesting take that if you're going with it was on Twitter, I forget who put it up there. If you're going with a team name that is more than 3 syllables, you have to be able to shorten it. Like Penguins isn't 3 syllables, but you can shorten that. The Pens, Capitals, Caps, Nationals, Nats, that sort of thing. Commanders, you can't really do that in a way that feels organic. I guess the comms, I don't know. You could just call them Washington. It's just kind of a weird name, doesn't really roll off the tongue. To what you were saying about the overall reveal, I found it incredibly hilarious that they still had to play it off as this big deal, even though everyone knew. Like, I think it was JP Finley on Twitter who was just the entire week leading up to it and is like, yeah, it's the Commanders. You already know what's coming. And that was just really awkward to listen to the rest of the week. And furthermore, this is probably my last overall point on the matter. I don't find it surprising at all that they just brushed off Chase Young, one of their most profitable, talented players. I'm not surprised they brushed off his opinion at all because it's Washington football team, or I guess the Washington Commanders now, just Washington, that organization just has a horrible track record with actually caring about what their players think. And that's just really sad to acknowledge, but it's true.
See, I get what you're saying, and I like the fact that you brought up Chase Young, that they're brushing him off. I don't know. I did not see any of the fan polls, didn't see any of the results, because I know that those were a thing. But I really feel that they just didn't take enough stock in what the community wanted. I don't know what the end all be all favorite name was. I'm sure something to do with hogs would have been very popular in the diehard fans, but there was never going to be one name that made everyone happy. But I think you could have come up with something better than this. And Ryan, in pre-show we were talking. I'm very excited to hear you rant about this because in pre-show we were talking about the jerseys, we're talking about the logo. You hate all of it. So I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to let you roll here for the next couple minutes. We can get Brian involved a little bit too before we move on to Brian Flores. But man, what's going on here? What's going on with our fellow NFC East team?
Dan, it's not necessarily that I have a problem with the name. I'm pretty neutral on the name, to be honest. I think, like Colby says, it kind of fits Washington, D.C. My problem comes with these jerseys. The jerseys are brutal. You look at these, and my first thought was is Washington moving to the Arena Football League? Like these scream Arena Football League jerseys. Some of the best jerseys in the NFL, 49ers, Cowboys, you name it. Very simple structured jerseys, very simple looking and very clean. Washington comes out with these jerseys. I will say the black one's probably the best because it's the most subtle, but the problem with the black jerseys comes in the helmet. There's an awkward looking W that's not really big enough to look natural, and it's right smack dab in the middle of the front of the helmet. It doesn't make much sense to me at all. I think the black helmets would be a lot better without it because they just have the numbers on the side. But the white jerseys have kind of awkward little dots in the numbers. It's just not a clean look to me. It's not traditional. I've talked to a lot of Commanders fans today. That's going to take me a while to get used to saying that, but they feel the same way. I want to shout out Jackson Didlake. We had a conversation earlier. He's not a fan. I've seen on Twitter, on social media, there's not really a lot of Washington fans that are fond of this look. And whether or not, criticism is listened to is yet to be known, but these jerseys are just absolutely brutal. I mean, the jerseys last year and the years before I thought were really good, really traditional, really clean. They kind of had like almost an Alabama look to them with just the numbers on the sides of the helmets. I thought that was a really clean look. And not to mention the W, which is just doesn't really scream Commanders to me at all. It's kind of just an awkward looking W. Dan, we were talking about a pre-show with like lines in the middle. That didn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, what I don't get is why not just keep the football team W? The football team W to me, it was nice. I liked the font, and I think that's my big beef with the numbers. Is maybe it's just me. I prefer block numbers on jerseys. I do. I feel like they could have made these look better. And you're talking about the whites where they're not solid. I saw these jerseys have been out for less than 10 hours. Less than 5 hours, really, have been officially released, of course. And I'm seeing people taking the exact same photo and making better mock-ups in Photoshop in 5 minutes. All they do is they just make the burgundy the right shade, and they just fill in the numbers, and then they throw some gold on the sleeves, and the white jerseys look 10 times better than the ones that they roll out. I don't understand how it got through this many people and it ends up looking this bad. Now, maybe in game they look better, but I don't know. And I think the thing, too, and Ryan, we were talking about again, there's no consistency throughout the three. They are three completely different looks. And look, with the NFL helmet rules changing, they're going to allow teams to use their throwback helmets, not just do the one helmet, which I think has been stupid for a long time. But I still feel that you have to have some level of consistency. If you wanted to have a home, an away, and an alt, like a black alt, and that went with, your main helmet, and then you throw in a fourth alt that can go, that's like a throwback, or it's just different, and you have some funky helmet combo to go with that can be fine. But no, my out of the three, I would say I like the burgundies the most. I think the whites are bad, and I think the blacks are fine. But then again, like you said, that helmet, the W right in the smack middle of the front of the helmet, it looks awful, and it looks so out of place, and I just don't like it at all. And honestly, with the Reds, with the homes, I think the nameplate for the name of the team, I think it's just too big. I think it off-centers everything, and I really liked the simplistic look of the football team jerseys, and I think they should have I'm not saying that they should have stuck with football team. That would have been my preference if I was a fan, but I don't know. I think it's a mess of a rollout. It's not a great team name that everyone can rally around. Yes, it has that DC angle of like, oh, military, capital of the United States, whatever. I just think that there was so many options that they could have gone better with this. Brian, you get the final word, and then we'll move on to the Flores lawsuit.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the uniforms too much because I haven't actually taken a look at them, but I gotta agree with Colby for the most part with the Commander's name. That, like, I don't hate it. I didn't like the Washington football team when they originally came out with that. Obviously, that was a placeholder. I didn't really like it, but it did kind of grow on me. You had like the WFT that you could use to shorten it, and I didn't hate it. So maybe I'll come to like Commanders. It just feels clunky to me. I'm not really sure what exactly it is about it, and like Colby was saying, I don't know. I think that you got to have some way to shorten it. And what exactly are you going to shorten with Commanders other than Washington? I think the biggest thing is, like you said, Dan, that I didn't really follow it that close, and I knew they botched the whole like release. And I don't know how, as a professional like sports team, yeah, people want to like dig in and see what happens, but I don't know how you screw it up that badly that everybody knows that isn't even following it that closely. So yeah, I don't know. I think on the whole, it's just a mess. And whether you think the Commanders is good or not, I think just the whole rollout of it was just an absolute disaster.
I mean, I know we got to move on here, but just one last thing on the whole rollout. They had Joe Theismann like 3 days before this name drop, 3 days before today. He's going on like some podcast and he's saying, "Oh yeah, we're the Commanders. I'm loving the name. I think it's gonna be great." And then the guy on the podcast is like, "So you think they're gonna go with Commanders?" Like, "Oh yeah, no, I think we've made a great choice." Like, Joe, come on, man. Someone's got to be able to just be in his ear while he's on a call and say, "Hey, you don't say that we've picked the name yet." You know. I don't know. I think, honestly, all of them. All 8 options, except for football team, would have been bad. But I know football team's too European. We can't do that. Whatever. All right, we got to move on now because we've got a monumental lawsuit here in the NFL. I can't think of anything like this happening on this stage. I think when you talk about the whole concussion, thing that the NFL dealt with, and still does to this day, but they, had litigation. This, to me, and a lot of players seem to think that this can be really big and earth-shattering. Now, I don't know how far this ends up going, but for those of you that aren't aware, Brian Flores, now former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, he's doing some interviews for new jobs because, let's be real, Brian Flores is a talented head coach, and he didn't get a lot of work with in his 3 years in Miami. His first year was essentially a lost year, and the last 2 years he's able to get winning records out of those teams. Obviously, yes, bad start last season, but Brian Flores is suing the NFL, and the main teams that he names are the Dolphins, his former employer, the Denver Broncos, who before he was hired by the Dolphins, he went on an interview with for a head coaching position, and then the New York Giants, who he was interviewing for in this coaching cycle after being fired from Miami. So the main bullet points here are that Brian Flores is basically suing the NFL for racial discrimination. And this isn't just about him and his words. This is about the whole issue of there being this being a 70% black league of players and the representation not being shown in higher positions, whether that be head coaches, coordinators, general managers, and owners. There are no black owners. There is one black head coach. I think there was something like 6 black GMs, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's a small percentage of black coordinators. So that was his whole lawsuit is built around that, built around those numbers, and also built around. And I was listening to WJFK last night, and they were talking about. They brought on a legal correspondent, and they were saying, "Hey, can you win a lawsuit based on what is essentially hearsay of discrimination?" I mean, that's let's put it like that. Can you, without written word, can you win a lawsuit on something like this when you're basically saying, okay, the expectations for a black coach is different, the treatment of a black coach is different? If you can't exactly prove that, but basically their legal correspondent said yes, it is possible to win this suit. So some of the major bullet points here. Let's start with Let's go in chronological order. He mentions the Denver Broncos and how he was interviewing for a head coaching gig there before he was hired in Miami. And he claims that team leadership, including John Elway and their owner at the time, who is now putting the team up for sale, they showed up to his interview clearly intoxicated, or at the very least hungover, and that gives him the strong idea, which, I mean, of course, if you show up to an interview drunk, you're not taking it seriously, that they weren't taking his candidacy seriously. Now, the debate between that ends up becoming, or at least the pushback to that is, well, that's not just racism, that's, them being stupid. Okay, let's table that for now. Let's go to his time with the Dolphins, where Stephen Ross, he alleges, the owner of the Dolphins, he wanted Brian Flores to tank his season. And in the NFL, if you're a head coach who gets fired and you get pointed out and you are clearly trying to lose games, that's going to sell your reputation. So he is asking to put his reputation on the line. Now, each time they lose, he was prepared to give him an extra $100,000 out of pocket, under the table. No big deal. he wanted Brian Flores to tank the season, and that was his first season in the league. When they started off, I want to say 0 for 11, but then they ended up winning their last 5 games or whatever. They had a stronger finish than their start. And then after being fired in Miami, after 2 winning seasons, after a season where they just came back from 1-7 to finish 9-8. Again, another strong finish, and a year ago, where they missed the playoffs by, I believe, like 1 game or just some tiebreakers, with a roster that's clearly in a rebuild. He gets let go, and then now he is currently interviewing for other jobs, including the New York Giants, who let go of Joe Judge and who have just recently hired Brian Daboll. Now, the evidence for this is that about discrimination here is Bill Belichick texts Brian Flores. Brian Flores is a former Belichick assistant, and he texts Brian Flores and says, "Hey, Brian, congrats on getting the New York job. I heard you got it. Congrats and good luck." And then Brian Flores texts him back, "Hey, Bill, thanks for the good luck. I'm interviewing for the Giants job on Thursday." "What do you mean I've already got it?" And then he texts Bill back and says, "Hey, Bill, are you texting Brian Flores or are you texting Brian Daboll?" And then Bill texts back, and Bill Belichick is just reading how he texts is hilarious, thinking about the man that Bill Belichick is, using all his exclamation points and question marks and whatnot. He looks like my dad when he texts, honestly. But him messing up that basically told Brian Flores, they've already picked Brian Daboll. Why am I going through with this process still? And to him, it's clear. It's so that the Giants could measure up to the requirements of the Rooney Rule, which I went into a little deeper last night because I didn't know the requirements for, interviewing minority head coaches. And on the external base, because a lot of people will point to Brian Flores and counter it with saying, well, the Giants had already interviewed Leslie Frazier. The Rooney Rule stipulates that you must, for a head coach position, interview 2 external candidates. So Leslie Frazier was one, Brian Flores would be the other one, and he was interviewed after Brian Daboll, who they already had made a decision for. So I don't know how you guys want to carry this discussion. I think that it's getting talked about all over the place. It's Pro Bowl week, it's Senior Bowl week, it's the week before the Super Bowl, and you got a name change going on. This is, to me, the biggest story. And again, I don't know how you guys want to handle this. I don't know how you want to take it about, but I do think that Flores has, I think he has a point. I think that there is criteria, and you can look at it outside. You've got Mike Tomlin, very successful head coach. And I was talking about it with friends. When you hire a guy, you shouldn't be looking to hire a guy who is black and then look for his qualifications. You should be trying to find a guy with qualifications, and then he happens to be. So I don't know how you guys want to take it, but I do think that in the NFL, players that, again, vast majority are African American, and they don't see that represented in their higher up positions. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on the lawsuit as a whole. I kind of went long there. Sorry about that. But let's get into it a little bit, and then we can talk some baseball.
Yeah, I just want to say I think we can go back and look at when Brian Flores was fired from the Miami Dolphins. I think now this information coming out about Stephen Ross, was that the reason that he let Flores go? The decision not to, go with the plan of tanking for a draft pick. Maybe, he took that as a form of disrespect and was like, okay, if you're not going to listen, you're out. So I think now there's obvious injustice being done to Brian Flores, who is a very qualified head coach in the National Football League. I think he's one of the better young coaches in the league. And the whole Bill Belichick situation, I think, just shows that the sad fact that teams would be still getting away with, just seeing the Rooney Rule as a formality, that they would have to interview, the minority head coaches, because the Giants would have gotten away with that had Bill Belichick not texted Brian Flores at the time, because the decision had obviously already been made And the Flores interview was kind of like, all right, we have to do this. Let's just get through it. Um, so I do think Flores certainly has a point in discrimination because it's very obvious what had been done here. And the fact that it wouldn't have come to light had Bill Belichick not texted Brian Flores, I think really shows a flaw in the system and shows where there maybe needs to be some, some changes. And I don't know where that change would be. I think we'll see in the coming days, how this all pans out. But I certainly think that at the very least, people know that there's stuff going on that's not right. Brian Flores is obviously a very good head coach. He, turned the Dolphins around, got them, near the playoffs this year in a season that was seemingly lost. So he obviously had the locker room, in his hand. And I think we all can agree that when Brian Flores was let go by the Dolphins, we are kind of like, why? Why is this happening? And I think the simple answer is that he just didn't agree with Stephen Ross on something. And Stephen Ross was like, okay, you don't agree, then, this isn't going to work out. So I do think he certainly has a point. And I know he was on Get Up today. I did not get a chance to listen to that interview, but I will probably turn that on shortly after the show. And I think that's going to bring a lot of stuff to light. But I certainly think there's definitely injustice being done to Brian Flores and a lot of other minority prospective head coaches.
Yeah, I see where y'all are coming from with this, and I just want to slip something in here real quick. That's something I've been thinking about for the past 24 hours that this has been revolving around the news cycle. I'm Now personally, I think that Brian Flores obviously does have a point about the racial bias within the system, within the NFL's hiring, within the higher ups like head coaches, GMs, owners, and all that stuff. Um, I just The one thing that gives me anxiety about this case is that I really hope that he comes into this lawsuit knowing that with airtight arguments. I hope he comes in knowing what he's doing, basically, because on the slight chance that he does end up getting this wrong and this lawsuit ends up just bottoming out because they didn't go about it the right way, then it ends up delegitimizing the push for this equality that we're trying to see, that we're trying to get more Black people as NFL head coaches, more Black people in positions of power like GM, but potentially even team ownership down the road. So that being said, that's the only thing with this. They need to go about this the right way. And I really am rooting for Brian Flores and his team, or his legal team, when it comes to, getting justice for him and for other people who may have been wronged through these similar practices.
Colby, I like that you bring that up, and then I'll throw it to Brian for the last word. But yeah, I think he does know, at the very least, what he's getting into, because he's already said, and Ryan, like you were talking about, part of that Get Up interview is, I know what I'm doing. I know that this is a risk for me for my future, and I ultimately think that this is bigger than myself. So Brian Flores is still up for head coaching positions too. He's suing the league, and he was interviewed. He went through a second round of interviewing with the Texans. So I think he understands what's at stake for his career. I think he just wants to try to initiate some change. And I think one thing that will be a really good tool for them, and I think at the end of the day this ends up getting settled, like the NFL with concussion lawsuits. I think probably their best tool in the toolbox is pointing out the Rooney Rule, because I think he wants to get rid of it. I think that is part of his lawsuit, because it essentially, the Rooney Rule itself lessens minority coaches in a way of saying, hey, you have to do this in order to reach a minor qualification. And so that just ends up being, okay, let's get some guys in who we think are actual candidates, and then, okay, we'll throw these two guys in to appease the Rooney Rule, and then we'll show up to our interview drunk and not serious. So, Brian, I want to throw to you for last word, and then we'll get into the baseball talk. Just general thoughts on the whole Brian Flores deal.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think even if the lawsuit doesn't pan out in the way that it hopefully should, the big news that this has caused, at least I hope, will maybe force some change because there's the whole public opinion and what you see on social media. If we're able to take this and kind of make this into a big deal, then the NFL, even let's say legally they're not forced to, they might, just for fan base and everything, have change occur. Because as you said, I mean, all you have to do is look at the stats. How many minority players are there to coaches and front office people? I mean, that right there, I mean, that's kind of, obviously you need more of an argument, but that's a pretty big case right there. So if nothing else, I'm just hoping that this will force the NFL into some kind of action, even if it's not legal or anything like that.
Yeah, we'll see, and we'll definitely follow this story as it progresses. Obviously, it's very new, very bold. The NFL just loves, creating stories for us. So that we'll see what comes of this. Okay, before we bring in Jake Lyman and Nick Brown to end our show today, Brian, you want to talk a little bit about baseball? I know that we have some lockout updates, just some general stuff about the state of the game. What do you have for us?
Yeah, so I was just gonna go over briefly here. Kind of, there was a meeting yesterday, and then there's a meeting tomorrow or today as well, actually, that got announced this morning. So, for me, I'll go through. We're obviously a long ways away from a deal here, but that's 4 meetings in 2 weeks. Overall, you have basically the kind of meetings that they do are the core economic issues, and then your non-core economic issues, which are as important, but it seems to be that the biggest issues between the league are, their core economic issues. So they met yesterday for 90 minutes. The biggest thing, it seemed that the MLBPA kind of moved on a couple of their positions a little bit, not much. It was service time manipulation and pre-arbitration pool money, which is basically just the players trying to get money for any of the rookies and that sort of thing that aren't at that 3-year mark, which is that arbitration. They moved from 105 million to 100 million, and the league is still at 10 million. So a long way to go there. And then for the MLBPA, they tried to institute this thing for the service time manipulation, which has been a big issue for MLB. They've basically been able to do whatever they want with their rookies and that sort of thing. So the players are trying to institute this rule of the top 30 or top 10, depending on what your position is in WAR, you get a full year of service. So a lot of times rookies come up halfway through the year, that sort of thing. So if you can finish in your position in some top part of WAR, then you get a full year of like as if you've played. So that's been a big thing, and it looks like MLB is with that. But they changed that to the top 20 and top 7. So there's been some ground given up, but if you look to anybody, John Heyman, Ken Rosenthal, Evan Durelich has had a lot of those updates on Twitter. If you go there, you can see a lot of the updates as they meet and do that sort of thing. And so the question really now is what's going to be the deal as they get towards opening day and when spring training is supposed to start. Right now, as it looks, that's the start of spring training is not going to be on time. That's almost a certainty, unless they make some serious ground here. So I was looking online, and Jesse Rogers from ESPN put this thing together about when you should start worrying. When it comes to spring training games, those start on February 26th. And in his eyes, you need to start worrying February 19th that we're going to miss those. Obviously, it's the 2nd today, so we're getting pretty close to that. And then when you're actually looking towards opening day, it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't get there. But like if we don't have spring training start on time, that doesn't necessarily mean we won't have opening day on time. But it's not great. And he said when to worry is about March 3rd. And that was going off of last year and COVID. They only gave them, I believe it was 20 days or so to get ready. And a lot of players felt that wasn't enough time. So I think they're aiming for about 4 weeks before games actually start to get prepped and get ready. So they're kind of in a holding pattern right now. I know I am definitely worried about this opening day and missing games, but I'm trying to stay hopeful. I don't know where you guys feel about the whole thing, but I'm thinking if they keep up this pace or if it gets exponentially, if they keep meeting more and more, we might start at least close to on time. I definitely think spring training games and spring training in general are going to get bumped back. But overall, I want to be optimistic, but it's definitely hard to at the moment. So
I want to be optimistic as well, but I'm going to disagree on the date to be worried. You said it was like March 3rd. Because
yes, for opening day.
Yeah, pitchers and catch. Oh, okay, for opening day. Yeah, that's not. I think opening day is definitely getting pushed back. I think it's time to start getting worried now because pitchers and catchers are supposed to report on the 14th of this month. That's before spring training games are supposed to start. But I think just the more and more we go, I honestly think we've already lost at least a month of games. I think that you're looking at, I don't know, 130 game schedule. I think that's what it comes at some point because now, once we get deeper and deeper into this, now it's not just going to be, okay, how do we hammer out, pre-arbitration? How do we hammer out, top players in war, stuff like that they're currently working on, which, by the way, the thing that gets me nervous is that the players are already starting to move back and the owners aren't starting to move up because we were talking about this last week. The owners started at 10 million. The players were started at 110. Now they're down to 105 and the owners haven't gone up with them. You got to meet in the middle somewhere, and so I need to see the owners budging even a little bit to say, hey, this could be something that happens in the near future because the whole point of pointing out those numbers was that, hey, they both agree this is a thing we need, but now it's just coming down to the figure, and I'm going to need to see some movement from the owners on that part. But even still, as we get closer to games, we're going to start to see what happened in 2020 with the COVID shortened schedule, which was, okay, how many games are we going to play? What's the money going to be like? Are we going to have prorated salaries? And we're just going to see all that repeated, and then it's going to just delay and delay and delay, and then you're not going to get any of this stuff figured out because it's going to take a backseat to how many games are we playing. I'm not on, baseball is just not going to play this year in 2022, and we're just not going to have a World Series or something like that. I'm not there yet, but I have no reason to believe that we're not going to fall into the same pattern of 2020 because the owners aren't going to budge. The players are going to make incremental moves. But again, as we get closer to game time, when are we going to start playing? How many games are we going to play? Salaries, all that's going to become the focus is going to shift away from the stuff that matters to that stuff. And then, I don't know, maybe you get a half-baked season. And then who knows, maybe they don't even extend the CBA for multiple years. Maybe they just do, okay, let's play 130 games this year and let's kick the can down the road on all this arbitration stuff and let's figure it out next year, and then we're in the same exact boat. I think this is just a really bad look.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely hard to argue with that. I'm hoping that somewhere along the line in their next couple of meetings that we'll see some movement from the owners. I think, like you said, that's kind of the only way I think we start on time. The only thing I'm hoping for, and I have to go through if there's rules on this or not, on what they can do to maybe push the season back some, so that way you can extend it and get more games that way. I don't know, like I said, I don't know what the exact rules are on that sort of situation, but that is my only kind of thought in the back of my head is maybe if this doesn't work out, maybe we can push it back and pick up 20 days on the end of the season or something and push back playoffs. I'm not sure how the owners or players are going to feel about that.
No, I don't think you could do that because then what, are we going to be playing the World Series in late November? They can't do that. The weather is just going to be terrible. I mean, October already is, when it gets into late October, it's, players aren't in favor of that. I don't see them pushing playoffs back that far because, I mean, I don't see a scenario where we get into March and we don't have an agreement, and it happens in mid-March, and then we have a 1 or 2 week spring training. We start in mid-late April, and they're saying, okay, well, we're starting about a month later. Let's just still play 162 games, and we have the risk of playing Game 7 of the World Series on December 1st. I don't see that happening. I don't know about you, Ryan, Colby, but I think we, at bare minimum, because I think that they all agree, you can't not have a baseball season, because that would just be the death of the sport. But you have to, I think at bare minimum, they can at least agree that they need a shortened season at some point. At some point, that's going to be the thing that comes on the table.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's gonna pop up at some point. And the only thing that the last thing to keep in mind here is you still have a ton of free agents that haven't signed, and big free agents like Carlos Correa and Kyle Schwarber and Chris Bryant and all those people. So you still have a lot of people that need to sign. So I don't know how they're going to factor that in because, yeah, the players that have signed can show up to their spring training the minute that CBA gets done, but you still are going to need some time for those players to sign with whatever team. I mean, hopefully they had some ideas of where they were going before the lockout actually started. So maybe the minute the lockout ends, I mean, on that day after, we'll get like 50 signings.
That's the thing I'm thinking of. Like, yeah, I mean, the backroom deals between agents and teams, those might still be happening. Why not just say, hey, let's open, we're not going to be opening this up, but you can still make backroom deals and handshake agreements in the lockout period. And then, as soon as we get this figured out, you're going to have a 12-hour window to lock in all your, handshake agreements, and we'll get that figured out. All right, Brian, thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break here, and then we will welcome in Jake Lyman and Nick Brown to talk about Virginia Tech men's basketball tonight against Georgia Tech. All right, Brian, thank you for that, and we'll see you on the side of the break.
One of the top teams in the ACC makes the trip up the East Coast to Blacksburg to face off with the Virginia Tech Hokies. It's Miami and Virginia Tech from Castle Coliseum. Top of the key finds Couture left arc, right back Aluma, straightaway three, knocks it down. Padula takes it for Virginia Tech. Back out Maddox, right wing three, swish. On the corner, takes one step and rattles it down from the left wing. Darius Maddox has his second three. 60 seconds to go. Couture unleashes the left wing three, and he got it. Hunter Couture's second triple of the day, and the Hokies back within 3. 50 seconds to go in this first half.
Hunter Couture with the ball, finds a wide open Keve Aluma, drives inside, gets the foul, and the bucket. Mutz gets the board again, swings it over to Aluma, who throws it down. Then Mutz, who finds Couture, a 4-point play opportunity. Finds Darius Maggs on that right wing. Mutz all alone in the corner, and that one's good. Justin Mutz amping up this crowd in Castle Coliseum. Three on the shot clock. McGusty step back triple, cold as ice. Feels a little bit of pressure, bounce pass into Mutz, who finds a wide open Hunter Couture. Nothing but nylon. McGusty drives, cuts inside, wide open Moore. It's an offensive foul. Pass inside to Charlie Moore from half court. Off the glass and in! Miami wins it on a half-court buzzer beater prayer. And the Hurricanes escape Blacksburg with a 78-75 victory. Oh my goodness.
And we welcome in Jake Lyman and Nick Brown. They will be on the call for 3304 Sports tonight as Virginia Tech takes on Georgia Tech in Castle Coliseum at 9 o'clock. For another ACC matchup. Jake, Nick, I want to welcome you aboard. And let's just get right into it. So I want to start out, we want to look at the Florida State game that happened this past weekend. Obviously, the story of the game, great play from Padula and Couture. They really highlighted the fact of the great shooting night that Virginia Tech had. But honestly, the positives from that game is the shooting, but also that level of shooting can't be sustained, right?
I mean, Leonard Hamilton said it best.
Yeah, I don't.
You got it, Jake. Go ahead, buddy.
You're good. No, I don't think it can. I think obviously you love to have that kind of shooting in a big game like that for Virginia Tech, a game that they needed after that Miami buzzer beater. But you're not going to get that every single night. You've got to be able to win in the paint like you did, like you usually do with Justin Mutz and Keve Aluma kind of leading the way. So I think that's going to be the key moving forward for Virginia Tech. And if they can get that going and maybe use some of that momentum from that Florida State game, they could possibly make a run to get back on that bubble and give themselves a chance to keep playing into March.
Coach Hamilton, he really said it best when he was like, you don't shoot 72% from three in a gym with nobody guarding you. You don't even do that in practice. I mean, that was an anomaly, and I think it would be a mighty big stretch if Tech fans think, that Hunter Couture is going to drop 9 threes a game, and Sean Padula is going to come off the bench and drop 6 per game as well. but really getting Sean's confidence, especially as a freshman, that's really key, especially in basketball, is to get your confidence rolling early and have a breakout game like that for Padula is going to do wonders for him for the rest of the season. So I think he's going to provide valuable, huge minutes for the rest of the way for the Hokies, especially after bouncing back after which Coach Young said was a terrible game for Padula in the Miami game. It was a perfect bounce back game, and he's going to give the Hokies a big boost off the bench.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about Padula there at the end, and you said how he's going to provide a spark off the bench for the Hokies, and he has struggled a little bit. The freshman jitters, I guess you could say. But he definitely had a great game against FSU. Do you think that FSU performance leads to some of Storm's minutes going to Padula to try and even out that point guard position?
Honestly, when I was watching that, I really thought the best lineup for the Hokies was having the three-headed monster and Murphy, Padula, and Couture all at the same time. Because you not only did you have Murphy who could bring the ball up the court, but you could also have Padula, and we know Murphy is he can shoot. He is a proven shooter in historical Wofford especially. But I don't think that numbers are going to really change as much. Mike Young stuck to the same starting lineup for the entire first half of the season. I don't think that's going to change. He doesn't want to throw off the team chemistry, whatever. But Padula might be getting more minutes off the bench. I know Tech fans certainly want him and Maddox more time on the court.
And I think you definitely are happy to see the bench finally coming into form. I think early in the ACC season, we were talking about how the Hokies really weren't getting anything off the bench. There were games where the entire bench combined was scoring 2, 4, 5 points. Now you're seeing Sean Padula and Darius Maddox step up. But I think the issue is less about who's on the court than it is about how they're playing. Storm Murphy has kind of tried to take a back seat as a scorer and more try and distribute and get other people shots. But that wasn't what Sean Padula was doing on Saturday in Florida State. He was creating shots. He was getting a switch on a 7-footer, and he was creating shots to get himself in the best position to score the basketball. I think maybe Mike Young shows Storm Murphy that film and says, hey, you play like this, and you can have a game like that as well. I don't think Padula is going to push Murphy too much. Maybe you see a little bit closer split there, but I think if Murphy starts playing a little bit more aggressively on the offensive end of the court, he can have a game like Padula and step up to be that scorer that I think Hokies fans expected him to be entering the season.
What I really liked out of the Florida State game for Murphy the most was that he was finally going towards the rim. He in the first half of the ACC schedule, he really just he dribbled to the nail or the free throw line and then pause, and he wouldn't commit to go to the hole all the way. But I really saw that in the Florida State game where he finally would go all the way to the hole and either kick out or go up for the layup. And even if he doesn't make those layups, it's still nice getting to the hole and collapsing the defense and then kick out to the shooters.
Talking with Jake Lyman and Nick Brown, commentating for 3304 Sports tonight in the Virginia Tech versus Georgia Tech game for men's basketball. Still looking back at Florida State and maybe even looking ahead. You guys were just talking about the bench, obviously mentioning Sean Padula's big game and talking a little about Darius Maddox, but those two, along with David Gasson, pretty much the big three off the bench this whole season, they all saw season highs in minutes against Florida State. Do you think Mike Young's rotation includes those three more down the stretch?
I would think so. I think that you can't get away with playing your 5 starters 35 plus minutes, which at times that's what the Hokies were doing. And I think we saw against Florida State with Keve Aluma getting into a little bit of foul trouble. That hasn't been an issue most of the season, but if it is, you have to have the depth behind him. You have to be able to bring in David Gasson or John Ogiaco and feel good about them down low. And early on in the season, I think Mike Young just wasn't quite confident in a lot of those guys coming off the bench. But I think we've seen flashes from all of them. Obviously, Padula, we saw it against Florida State. Maddox had a great game against Miami. If you remember back towards the beginning of the season, David Gasson had a few big games. So I think you're seeing flashes. I think now you're starting to see a little bit more consistency from those guys off the bench. And that's what Mike Young's looking for. And I think you want to see those guys get more minutes and get a little bit more adjusted to the ACC game as we head down the stretch here this season.
And, when Aluma gets into foul trouble or whatever, and, truth is Aluma can't play all 40 minutes of the game. You need Gasson to come in. I think he really is the next best big man off the bench. And I know, it's for Hokies fans, it's going to stink that, Luma and Mutz are going to leave this year. I mean, that's just a fact. So Gason's, I guess, being groomed to be, next year's pseudo big man. They're bringing in the 7-footer Wessler. Big John, I guess, could start as a starting center, but Gason's going to play a lot of minutes next year. And so I think getting him more and more minutes, especially in the latter half of this season for the Hokies, is going to be proving to be crucial next season when they're going to need him to be a starter.
Yeah, you definitely spent a lot of time on the front court there, just kind of a little bit of a segue into our next question. And you also mentioned earlier in the broadcast about the interior defense, how the Hokies need to win in the paint. Obviously, the caveat that comes with that is the lack of size that the Hokies have compared to other teams in the conference. So what do you think Coach Young might need to do in the way of adjustments to kind of get to where they need to be playing in the post?
I mean, you let Baycott go off against you with UNC. Baycott's going to get 15 and 15 against any team in the ACC. Flat out, he's just the best big man in the conference, in my opinion. Letting Karnick go off for Boston College. Karnick has shown flashes this season for the Eagles. He dropped 17, I think, 2 games prior to the Hokies, but going off for 25 plus, I know that's inexcusable for Coach Young. He didn't like that at all. But I thought that the Hokies really did a fantastic job in the interior defense. Yes, they let the big man for Florida State drop 12 or whatever, but they were all dunks. And that man, he had the significant size advantage, height advantage, and all he had to do was turn around and dunk. And Gason was much smaller. But Mutz is a freak athlete. I mean, at that height, and he's got length, and he's a freak athlete, and he can match up. He's also got the size to match up against the big boys inside. So I really liked what they did with collapsing on to the big man whenever the ball got into the paint. And they got a lot of block shots. And Maddox, ironically, he's a taller guard. He's been getting a ton of blocks the last 2 games. I think he had 2 versus Miami, and then I think he also had 2 or 3 against Florida State too. So you never get those block shots up in the air, or rebounding is going to be more crucial. But block shots in the interior defense, I thought, proved to be really, really good against Florida State.
And during the Mike Young era, and even back to Buzz Williams, when the other team has a dominant guy in the paint, that's when the Hokies have struggled. I mean, Baycott's done it to the Virginia Tech for what seems like 3 straight years. And then in the NCAA tournament last year, I believe Colin Castleton was his name for Florida.
Yeah.
He went off, had a huge game. Karnick for BC, not even a dominant guy. But the Hokies have struggled when they have a guy in the paint they just don't know how to handle. I think that is going to be the issue, and you're not going to shoot like you did against Florida State every single game. So I think that's something for Mike Young to figure out. When you have a size disadvantage in the paint and you're not shooting well, how do you win those games? And that could be the downfall of the Hokies towards the end of the season.
My big thing on Keve Aluma in the paint is he's aggressive on the offensive side, plays physical offensive side, works his man down low. You just don't see it on the defensive side. He's kind of soft on the defensive side of the ball. And it really looks like he exerts more of his physicality and energy on the offensive side than he does on the defense. He's a solid rebounder, but for his size, I think he should definitely be rebounding a whole lot more than what he's getting right now.
On the show this week on Monday, we talked about how for this season to, rebound, that seems to be the stereotypical game where a team that gets hot in March, you look back and that's the game that they won that started the stretch. Would you say that for the stretch to continue, that tonight's game is a must win in order to keep this momentum?
Yeah, I think so. I think you look at this stretch coming up and the teams that the Hokies are going to be playing over the next week and a half. You've got Georgia Tech tonight, who is 2-7 in the ACC. Pitt's 3-7 in the conference. You get them back to back on Saturday and then on Monday. And then Syracuse, who has not been very good this year as well. I think if you don't win 3 of those games, you're probably not going to find your way into the NCAA tournament unless you make a deep run in the ACC tournament. I thought after that Miami buzzer beater, I thought that was the one that kind of breaks you. After starting 2-6 in the conference, you're up late on the best team in the conference, at least by record, entering that game, and you blow it, give up a half-court buzzer beater. it feels like the team could have just mailed it in at that point and said, you know what, we're defeated. This just isn't our year. And they came back and they responded well against Florida State. So I think that's the win that could get them going. But again, this stretch coming up, a lot of must-win games, starting with tonight against Georgia Tech.
Veteran laden teams, they react to things a whole lot differently than freshmen do. Like you look at Memphis. Memphis collapsed early, but they have a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds running the show there with Penny Hardaway as coach. And they've just collapsed after they had a solid start, about 4 or 5 wins. And then after they started doing poorly, they just tanked. I think with the Hokies being such a veteran laden team, yes, that Miami game sucked. It sucked the wind out of everybody in Castle Coliseum that night. But the team could have folded there. But this veteran team knows, hey, that's behind you. You can put it behind you. And they could have also, Mike Young may have just used it to light a fire under them. And maybe that loss does help propel them. Because, yes, Virginia Tech, even though that game sucked, I think that was a huge positive for the Hokies this season, competing with what was the best team in the ACC and is record-wise with Miami. They played a fantastic game that day. It just, a freak miracle to end that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was certainly the Miami game was certainly a good overall showing. And I think someone who was in the press conference actually did end up making the point, asking them whether or not that game felt a little better, considering that it ended in the freak way that it did. Moving on to Georgia Tech, though. Georgia Tech kind of in a similar situation to the Hokies, trying to play to get back on the bubble. These teams are very similar, at least in terms of how their seasons have panned out, to the point where, their last 2 games were a Miami loss and an FSU victory. It's kind of uncanny. But looking specifically at the team, what do you think we need to watch out for tonight?
I think Georgia Tech, obviously, you mentioned the expectations coming in. This is a team that won the ACC last year with kind of a Cinderella run in the ACC tournament. And then they just haven't come back and been the same team. And that'll happen when you lose some of your big players. Obviously, Jose Alvarado, a great guy up top. And then down low, Moses Wright was an ACC Player of the Year candidate last year, if not won the ACC Player of the Year. So those 2 guys, losing them obviously had a big impact on them. They've still got good players, Michael DeVoe and Jordan Usher. But I think Georgia Tech is in a similar situation. Again, high expectations coming into the year. And trying to get a big win tonight. I think, you don't want to say this is an elimination game heading into tonight. It's still early February, but this is one that's going to be big for both teams if they want to keep their tournament hopes alive.
I mean, you lose 2 NBA caliber players in Moses Wright and Jose Alvarado. I think Alvarado just got his first start with the Pelicans or a couple of weeks ago, and then Moses Wright, he's floating around the G League right now. I think he's with the Clippers team. But yeah, that's 2 NBA quality players that you lose right there. However, I don't think there's really much excuses for what they're doing. I mean, you have Michael DeVoe, who's averaging 19 points a game, and then Jordan Usher as well, with 15 points a game. Those dudes are both, one step away from dropping 30 plus on anybody in the conference. So I think Georgia Tech just, they also brought in a ton of transfers, and either the transfers can really help you, as you see in Texas Tech last night, and their whole team basically was a transfer from last year, or it could throw off your team chemistry, and you're still trying to mold it. I've counted there was 9 different players have started a game this season for Georgia Tech, and consistency is key when it comes to building team chemistry, and I just haven't seen it there. You'd easily just see it in the game starting numbers.
All right, and lastly, before you guys go here and get ready for tonight's game, we know that when you guys are doing your prep, you mark down little interesting tidbits of players, along the likes of Matthew Stafford and Clayton Kershaw being high school best friends and whatnot. So anything interesting that you took away from this game while doing your research?
Yeah, I think Miles Kelly, freshman, he grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, but he went to Hargrave Military Academy down in Chatham, just 2 hours away. I think that was a pretty big nugget right there. He's played in 18 games this season. He's only averaging 3.4 points per game, but I thought that was pretty cool. Little, coming back to Southwest Virginia, I guess he could I don't know if he ever visited Virginia Tech in his year at Hargrave, but you know, hey, you float around here. I know Virginia Tech never offered him, which I thought was interesting, but yeah, I mean, just a Hargrave Military right down the road, 81, 2 hours away.
I got a few here. First, coming off the bench, I might butcher the pronunciation here. I haven't quite looked at the pronunciation guide. Saba Gigabaria.
Gigi Baria.
Gigabaria. Okay. Well, he's a sophomore center coming off the bench, and he's a native of Georgia. No, not the state, but the country. So he comes from Georgia, the country, and went to Georgia, the state, to play basketball, which I thought was kind of fun. And then in the starting lineup, Michael DeVoe, we've talked about him, the leading scorer for Georgia Tech. Native of Orlando, Florida, could see a matchup with another Orlando kid in Hunter Couture on the outside today. So a couple of geographical facts there for you. I love again, I'm going to butcher the name until Gigabaria. Is that what we're...
Gigi Baria.
Gigi Baria, coming from Georgia, the country, playing in Georgia, the state for basketball. I thought that was a fun one.
All right, very nice. Thank you guys so much. Good luck tonight. That is Jake Lyman, Nick Brown for 3304 Sports on the call for Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech men's basketball. You can hear their highlights on Twitter at 3304 Sports and catch their whole game call on YouTube. And then also be sure to follow Carter Hill, CB Hill _ 03 on Twitter. He will be our live beat writer for the night. I want to thank Colby Talley, Julian Ferdman, and Brian Kearney for being a part of our show today. We'll see you all tomorrow for 3304 Daily. Take care, everyone.